What would you do if obeying an order meant leaving children behind a frozen door? 20 years earlier, Officer Callum Pierce stopped for a young woman no one else would help. She was freezing beside a smoking car, holding a sick German Shepherd puppy under the snow. Callum gave her his coat, his money, and a chance to survive, then disappeared without asking for thanks. Years later, that same officer broke a command to save 32 lives inside a snowbound school. But the town called him reckless, and the courtroom waited to decide his future. Tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches you, please like, share, and subscribe. By daylight, Lake Aurora, Maine looked like the kind of winter town people put on postcards and never quite believed existed. Snow rested cleanly on the sloped roofs of bakeries and hardware stores. Warm yellow bulbs hung in the windows along Main Street. Children in bright coats skated on the frozen edge of the lake, while their parents stood nearby, with paper cups of coffee steaming between their gloves. The whole place seemed gentle when the sun was up, almost protected, as if the white hills around it had folded themselves into a shelter. But winter towns had two faces. After dark, when the shops closed and the laughter left the ice, the same snow could turn hard and blue. The same lake became a black sheet of wind. The same roads that looked charming under holiday lights became narrow, slick, and unforgiving. That was the Lake Aurora Callum Pierce knew best. Officer Callum Pierce was 42 years old and nearing the end of a long, late shift. He drove his patrol SUV along the road that curved around the frozen lake, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near the radio clipped to his dark navy uniform. His black tactical vest sat square across his chest, his badge dulled by a dusting of melted snow, his shoulder patches catching the occasional flash of dashboard light. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and the quiet strength of someone who had spent years learning how not to waste motion. His face was rugged and angular, light tan from weather rather than leisure, with sharp blue-gray eyes that rarely missed small details. Short dark brown hair was trimmed in a clean police style, and very short stubble shadowed his jaw. Nothing about him looked careless. Nothing about him looked soft either, though people who knew him well understood that softness had not vanished from him. It had simply gone deep where grief usually hid. The heater hummed against the windshield, while the wipers pushed wet snow aside in slow, heavy arcs. Callum should have been thinking about paperwork waiting at the station, or the cup of stale coffee sitting in the holder beside him, or the ache behind his shoulder blades after 10 hours of calls that were small but never simple. Instead, as often happened on winter nights, his thoughts drifted toward a road outside another town, another storm, another set of headlights that had not stopped. His younger sister, May, had been 23 when her car slid into a ditch during a February freeze. The official report used clean words: delayed discovery, exposure, severe weather conditions. Those words did not say what Callum still carried. They did not say that several vehicles had passed the stretch of road before someone finally called it in. They did not say how long a person could remain alive in the cold, waiting for a door to open, waiting for somebody to decide that being late was less important than stopping. May's death had not made Callum reckless. It had made him precise. It had carved one rule into him so deeply that time had never worn it down. If someone was left in the cold, he did not drive past. The lakeside road was nearly empty. A pickup passed in the opposite direction with chains rattling under its tires. Far ahead, a pair of taillights glowed red for a moment, then vanished around a bend. Callum eased his speed down as the wind crossed the ice and struck the road sideways. Snow slid across the pavement in ghostly sheets, blurring the shoulder. He scanned by habit: fence line, ditch, frozen culvert, old mailbox leaning under ice. Then he saw the shape. At first it was only a dark lump beyond the beam of his headlights. A car, maybe. Then the snow shifted, and the shape sharpened into an old sedan angled badly off the shoulder, its rear end still too close to the lane. The hood was raised. White smoke or steam poured upward, torn sideways by the wind. Callum's foot came off the accelerator before he made a conscious decision. A second later, another vehicle approached from behind him, slowed just enough for its driver to look, then swung wide and continued on. Its taillights disappeared into the storm. Callum flicked on his emergency lights. Red and blue washed across the snow, across the frozen weeds by the ditch, across the smoke rising from the sedan like breath from a wounded animal. He parked a safe distance behind it, angled his patrol SUV to shield the scene from passing traffic, and keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Pierce. I'm out with a disabled vehicle on East Lake Road, just north of mile marker 12. Heavy smoke from the engine compartment. One vehicle, unknown occupants. Stand by." The dispatcher answered with static and a clipped acknowledgement. Callum did not wait for more. He pulled on his gloves, opened the door, and stepped into the storm. The cold hit him with immediate teeth. It pushed under his collar and slapped wet snow against his face. His boots crunched through old ice beneath fresh powder as he moved toward the sedan. He did not run. People in crisis often mistook speed for threat, especially at night, especially when uniforms and flashing lights arrived before trust did. He kept his hands visible, shoulders relaxed, voice ready but unused until he understood what he was walking into. "Mom," he called when he was close enough to be heard. "Lake Aurora Police. I'm here to help." A figure moved on the far side of the open hood. She had been almost invisible in the storm, a narrow shape pressed close to the dead car. When the patrol lights swept over her, Callum saw how young she was, 19, maybe 20 at most. Her sweater was a pale cream color, soaked dark in patches and far too thin for the weather. Jeans clung wetly to her legs. Old canvas shoes had already taken in snow. Her hair, chestnut brown and tangled by wind, stuck to her cheeks in damp strands. She turned toward him with the exhausted fear of someone who had already asked the night for mercy and received none. "I didn't know what else to do," she said, though he had not asked a question. Her voice shook so hard the words broke apart. "It started smoking. I tried to pull over. I thought it was going to catch fire." "You did the right thing getting out," Callum said. His tone stayed low and even. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head quickly, then seemed to realize the movement exposed what she was holding. Her arms tightened around, a small bundle pressed to her chest. At first, Callum thought it was a blanket. Then a tiny dark muzzle appeared between the folds of wet fabric. A German shepherd puppy, no more than a few months old, stared out with dull brown eyes. Its warm sable fur was plastered flat, black along the back and ears, with a small lighter patch on the chest, like a faint ember refusing to die. One ear had begun to rise, the other still folded weakly to the side. The puppy trembled in violent little bursts that shook the girl's arms. Callum's attention narrowed. Steam from the engine, slick shoulder, freezing wind. Underdressed girl, hypothermic animal. He could smell hot coolant, burned rubber, and something metallic under the snow. The sedan was old enough to be more problem than transportation. Its bumper was cracked, one headlight dimmer than the other, the rear window crowded with everything the girl owned. Trash bags, a laundry basket, a cardboard box with books, a folded blanket that looked too thin to help anyone. On the passenger seat, barely visible through the fogged glass, lay a large envelope stamped with the name of a community college. "What's your name?" Callum asked. The girl hesitated, not because she had not heard him, but because life had taught her that names could be used against people. Then the puppy gave a small, breathless whine, and her expression folded around it. "Elena," she said. "Elena Whitcomb. His name is Timber." "How long have you been out here, Elena?" "I don't know. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe more." She looked past him toward the empty road, where another set of headlights appeared in the distance. For one brief second, hope crossed her face. The car slowed, moved carefully around Callum's patrol SUV, and continued into the storm. Elena watched it go as if watching a door close. Nobody stopped. Callum felt the old scar inside him pull tight. Not on his skin, not anywhere anyone could see, somewhere deeper. He looked at the passing taillights until they disappeared, then back at the girl. "I stopped." The words were simple, but something in Elena seemed to hear more than the words themselves. She swallowed, her lips blue at the edges. "I didn't steal the car," she said suddenly. "I mean, it looks bad, but it's mine." "Sort of. It was my foster brother's before he left. I have the registration somewhere. I was just trying to get to Caribou Junction. A friend said maybe I could sleep on her couch for a few nights. I found Timber yesterday behind a storage shed, and he was coughing, and I thought if I could get him somewhere warm." Her voice caught. She looked down at the puppy as if apologizing to him for every mile she had failed to drive. "I thought I could make it." Callum did not interrupt. He had learned that people in crisis often confessed things no officer had accused them of, not because they were guilty, but because they were used to being judged before they were helped. He glanced at the open hood again. The smoke had thinned into steam, but the smell was worse. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "The car may not burn, but the engine is too hot and the road is getting slick. I need you to step away from the front end. Slowly, keep the dog against you." Elena obeyed, but her knees nearly buckled on the first step. Callum moved closer without lunging, ready to catch her if she fell. Timber's eyes shifted toward him. The puppy did not growl, it was too weak for that. But it lifted its head a fraction, as if some small animal instinct understood that the man in the dark uniform had changed the weather around them, not by stopping the storm, but by refusing to let it have the final word. Callum unzipped his heavy winter police jacket. The moment he opened it, the cold rushed against his uniform and vest, needling through the layers beneath. He ignored it. Elena stared at him, confused. "What are you doing?" "Keeping you upright," he said. "You'll freeze. Not before you do." He removed the jacket completely, the dark navy fabric heavy with melted snow on the outside but warm inside from his body. He stepped close enough that Elena stiffened, then paused until she saw he was not reaching for Timber or her belongings. He lifted the coat around her shoulders with careful, deliberate hands and drew it forward so it covered both her and the puppy. The jacket swallowed her narrow frame. The fleece-lined collar rose almost to her chin. Timber disappeared into the warmth, then gave a tiny shuddering sigh that sounded too much like relief. Elena's eyes dropped to the front of the coat. The metal nameplate caught a pulse of red-blue light. "Pier," 5 letters, sharp against the dark fabric. She stared at them as if they were something she needed to memorize quickly before the storm took them away. The badge, the radio cord, the shoulder patch, the smell of cold air and leather and duty, none of it mattered to her as much as that name. She did not know yet whether this officer would fix the car, call someone, write a report, or vanish after doing the minimum required. She only knew that for the first time that night, warmth was touching Timber's body. For the first time that night, her own hands were not completely numb. For the first time in longer than she wanted to admit, someone had looked at her and decided she was worth the trouble. Callum stepped back and studied her face. Color had not returned yet, but the worst of the shaking had begun to change. She clutched the jacket closed around the puppy, not like someone taking a gift, but like someone holding a fragile chance she feared might be taken away. Snow collected in Callum's short dark hair and on the shoulders of his uniform shirt. The wind pressed against him, cold and sharp, but he kept his expression calm. Commanding did not have to mean loud. Trustworthy did not have to mean gentle in the obvious ways. Sometimes it meant standing in a storm without asking the person you had helped to explain why she needed help in the first place. "Stay right there," he said. "Keep him covered. I'm going to look at the engine and make sure this doesn't get worse." Elena nodded, too overwhelmed to answer. Timber shifted inside the coat and tucked his damp nose against the warm lining. The patrol lights continued to sweep across the frozen road, turning the falling snow red, then blue, then white again. Behind them, Lake Aurora lay silent under its cover of ice. Ahead of them, the old sedan smoked beside the shoulder, its hood raised like a broken wing. Callum turned toward it, already measuring the danger, the distance to town, the cold in the girl's hands, the fading strength of the puppy beneath his coat. Elena watched him move through the flashing light, and her fingers closed around the edge of the jacket where the name Pierce rested against her chest. She did not know his first name. She did not know the grief that had taught him to stop, but in the frozen dark beside the lake, that one name became the first solid thing she had been able to hold all night. Callum Pierce did not open the sedan's hood all the way at first. He lifted it just enough to let the worst of the steam escape sideways, then waited with one gloved hand on the metal edge, watching the white cloud unravel into the snowy dark. People who did not understand machines often treated smoke like a single danger. But Callum had learned long ago that each smell told its own truth. Burned oil had one warning. Melted wiring had another. Hot coolant had a sweet, sharp bite that clung to the back of the throat. This was coolant, mostly, and old rubber cooked past its limit. Bad enough to strand a girl in the cold, not yet bad enough to turn the car into a fireball if he stayed careful. "Keep the dog inside the coat," he said over his shoulder, "and don't stand in front of the car. If anything shifts, I want you away from the hood." Elena obeyed without argument. The oversized police jacket hung nearly to her knees, the nameplate still resting crooked against her chest. Timber had stopped shaking so violently, though small tremors still passed through him in uneven waves. She held him as if the warmth might leak out if her fingers loosened. The patrol lights moved across Callum's back while he bent into the engine compartment. He looked larger without the coat somehow, not because he was trying to appear strong, but because the cold made every controlled movement seem deliberate. His dark navy uniform shirt was already collecting wet snow along the shoulders. The black tactical vest took most of the wind, but not the temperature. Could see his breath come in pale bursts, steady and measured. The engine bay was cramped, dirty, and tired in the way old cars became tired when every repair was meant to buy only another month. Callum clicked on the flashlight, clipped to his vest, and angled the beam over the radiator, hoses, clamps, and battery terminals. A thin split ran along the upper coolant hose near a metal clamp, wide enough for pressure to spit fluid across the engine block. The battery posts were crusted white with corrosion. One cable sat slightly loose, probably shaken worse by the rough shoulder when Elena pulled over. He could almost hear his father's voice from a garage 25 years earlier, rough with cigarette smoke and patience. "You don't need to make it new, Cal. You need to make it get home." His father, Warren Pierce, had never been a gentle man in the ordinary sense. He had been hard on tools, hard on invoices, harder on his own knees than he ever admitted. But he could listen to an engine with the same care other men gave to church music. Callum had spent half his teenage winters sweeping the floor of that garage, fetching clamps, learning the difference between a repair and a promise. A roadside patch was not a promise. It was a narrow bridge. It got a person from danger to shelter, nothing more. Tonight, that was enough. He walked back to the patrol SUV and opened the rear compartment. Inside, beside flares, a wool blanket, traffic cones, and a medical kit, he kept a small roll pouch of things the department did not require but he carried anyway. Heat-resistant tape, spare hose clamps, zip ties, a folding knife, a small wire brush, and a bottle of water he had meant to drink hours ago. He brought the pouch back to the sedan and set it on the fender. Elena watched in silence for several seconds before fear pushed words out of her again. "Are you allowed to do that?" Callum glanced at her. "Allowed to keep your car from dying in the road? I mean..." She looked toward the patrol SUV, then down at the slush around her shoes. "I don't have money for a ticket," he understood then. Not the words alone, but the shape beneath them. She was not asking about policy. She was asking what this rescue would cost. Some people learned early that help often arrived with a bill attached, even when the bill was not written on paper. "I'm not writing you a ticket," he said. Her eyes lifted quickly, suspicious before they could be grateful. "You don't know anything about me. I know you pulled over instead of driving until the engine seized. I know you got out when you smelled smoke. I know you kept that dog warm before you kept yourself warm. That's enough for tonight." Elena looked away. Snow clung to her lashes. Timber made a small coughing sound inside the coat, and whatever pride she had been trying to hold together broke into worry again. "He was worse before," she whispered. "Behind the storage shed. He could barely stand. I thought if I got him to a vet tomorrow morning." She stopped because tomorrow morning had started to sound like a country too far away. Callum tightened the first clamp by hand, then used the multi-tool to secure it. "There may not be a tomorrow morning for him if he stays wet and cold," he said, not cruelly, only honestly. "So we don't wait that long." Elena stared at him, but he had already returned to the engine. He cleaned the split hose with a rag from his pouch, scraping away coolant and grime as best he could. He wrapped the heat-resistant tape slowly and tightly, layer over layer, stretching it until it bit into itself. He added a second clamp over the thickest part of the patch, then checked the hose with his thumb. It would not last. He knew that. It might hold 10 miles if she drove gently. It might hold 12. The North Lantern Motor Inn sat 8 miles away near the old mill road, close enough to be possible, far enough to feel cruel. A gust came hard off the lake and pushed Elena sideways. Callum stepped out from behind the hood. "Get in the driver's seat for a minute." "I thought you said not to stay in the car." "I said don't sit in it with smoke pouring through the vents. Right now I need you out of the wind while I check the battery." He opened the driver's door and waited. Elena hesitated, as if accepting even temporary shelter required permission from some invisible judge. Then she climbed in carefully. Still wrapped in his jacket, Timber tucked close against her chest. The interior light showed him more of the life she was carrying. A trash bag of clothes, a cracked phone with a dead screen, an envelope from Aroostook Community College, a paperback grammar book with bent corners, a small framed photo turned face down in the center console. She was not running from one bad night. She was trying to start an entire life in a car that could barely cross county lines. Callum closed the door halfway to block the wind but left it cracked for air. He returned to the engine, brushed corrosion from the battery posts, tightened the loose cable, and poured the bottled water into the coolant reservoir. It was not proper coolant, not even close, but it would lower the temperature long enough to move the car slowly. When he was done, he shut the hood with care instead of force and tapped the metal twice. "Try it," he called. Elena shifted Timber with one arm and turned the key. The engine coughed, failed, caught on the second try, then settled into a rough idle. The sound was ugly, uneven, but alive. Relief flashed across her face so suddenly it looked painful. Callum raised one hand. "Do not celebrate yet. This is temporary. You're going to North Lantern Motor Inn. 8 miles, 20 miles an hour, no faster. Keep the heat low. If the temperature gauge climbs into the red, pull over immediately. If the engine knocks, pull over. If you smell smoke again, pull over. Understand?" She nodded quickly. "North Lantern. 20 miles an hour, heat low, pull over if it gets worse. Good." She looked down at Timber, then at Callum through the half-open door. "I don't have enough for a room." Callum already knew. He had known from the shoes, the envelope, the way she asked about a ticket before she asked about herself. Still, hearing her say it made the night heavier. He reached into his back pocket and took out his wallet. There was no ceremony in it, no grand gesture. He counted nothing, kept nothing back, and removed every bill inside. It was not a fortune, but it was cash enough for a room, food, and a first step away from freezing. He folded the bills once and held them out. Elena did not take them. Her face changed, not into gratitude but alarm. "No, Elena, no, I can't. I don't even know you. I can't take money from a police officer. I can't take your coat and your money. That's not." She searched for a word strong enough to defend the last piece of herself. "That's not right." Callum stood in the open door, snow gathering on his sleeves, and for a moment his expression softened in a way that made him look less like an officer and more like a man who understood exactly how pride could become a dangerous thing. "Tonight is not the night to let self-respect kill you and the dog." The words landed harder than he intended. Elena's mouth tightened. Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. Something in her had been bracing for pity, for a lecture, for suspicion, for the kind of help that made a person feel smaller. This was different. He was not asking her to be helpless. He was asking her to survive long enough to have choices again. Slowly, with shaking fingers, she accepted the money. Timber shifted under the coat and pushed his damp nose against the edge of her wrist, as if approving a decision she could not yet forgive herself for making. Callum closed her fingers around the bills. "Room first, then hot food if they have any. After that, keep the dog warm. I'm going to follow at a distance until you reach the motel. You don't have to do that, I know." The drive to North Lantern Motor Inn took almost half an hour, because Elena obeyed every instruction, as if one wrong movement might erase the mercy she had been given. Callum followed far enough back that she would not feel crowded, close enough to see if the sedan started smoking again. Twice the engine stuttered. Once the temperature needle crept high, then settled. Snow fell harder near the mill road, thickening into the headlights like white ash. When the faded sign for North Lantern finally appeared, half its bulbs were burned out, but the word vacancy glowed red beneath the roofline. To Elena, it might as well have been a lighthouse. The motel clerk was a broad woman in her 50s named Mavis Doolan, with gray blonde hair pinned messily above a flannel shirt, and the unimpressed eyes of someone who had seen every kind of traveler winter could break. She looked from Elena's wet shoes to the puppy under the police jacket, then to Callum standing behind her in a soaked uniform shirt. "No dogs in the rooms," she said automatically. Callum placed his badge on the counter, not aggressively, just enough for the metal to catch the lobby light. "Tonight there is." Mavis held his stare for 3 seconds, then sighed as if humanity were an inconvenience she had decided to tolerate. "Room 6 has old towels. Don't let him chew the heater cord." Elena paid with the cash Callum had given her, cheeks burning as though everyone in the lobby could see the exact shape of her need. Callum asked Mavis to add breakfast to the room and slid more bills across the counter before Elena could protest. Then he stepped away and used the phone near the vending machine. His voice dropped low, but Elena heard enough. "Dog, hypothermia, coughing, North Lantern. Yes, I know it's late, Lillian. I wouldn't call if it could wait." Dr. Lillian Shore arrived 25 minutes later, in a green wool coat thrown over blue clinic scrubs, red-brown hair, streaked with silver escaping from a loose knot at the back of her head. She carried an old leather veterinary bag that looked older than some of the cars in the lot. Her eyes were sharp, but the moment she saw Timber, all impatience vanished. "Oh, little man," she murmured, and the room changed around her. It became less like a motel and more like a place where something fragile might be brought back. Callum waited outside room 6 while Lillian worked. He stood under the narrow awning with his arms folded against the cold, listening to the muffled sounds beyond the door. Elena's anxious questions, Lillian's calm replies, the rustle of towels, the low hum of the wall heater. Mavis brought him a paper cup of coffee without asking if he wanted it. "You look like a man too stubborn to come inside," she said. "Usually am. Girl yours? No. Dog yours? No." Mavis looked toward room 6, then back at him. "You always freeze for strangers, Officer Pierce?" Callum took the coffee. It was too hot and too bitter. "Only when they're cold." Nearly an hour passed before Lillian opened the door. Elena sat on the edge of the bed inside, still wearing his police jacket, Timber wrapped in dry towels against her lap. The puppy's breathing was still rough but steadier. His eyes were half closed now, not with surrender, but with exhausted sleep. Lillian stepped into the walkway and spoke quietly to Callum. "Beginning hypothermia, respiratory infection, maybe early pneumonia if she had waited. He needs warmth, rest, antibiotics, and a proper exam tomorrow. But he has a chance." Callum nodded once. "Bill me. You always say that like it's a parking meter." Lillian gave him a tired look, but not an unkind one. "I'll send it to the K9 support fund." "No, send it to me." She studied him for a moment, then seemed to understand there was no useful argument to have in the snow. "Fine." Inside the room, Elena heard enough to stand. Timber stirred, and she froze, afraid to wake him. "Officer Pierce," she called softly. Callum turned toward the doorway. "I need your number," she said, "or your first name. Something. I'll pay you back. I promise." He looked at the girl in the motel room, at the old towels, the community college envelope now lying on the small table, the puppy alive because the night had been interrupted in time. He could have given her a card. It would have been easy. But he had seen people turn rescue into debt and debt into shame. He did not want his name to become a chain around the first safe breath she had taken all night. "No," he said gently, "you don't owe me a thing. But your coat? Keep it until you don't need it. That could be a long time. Then keep it a long time." Elena stared at him, stunned by the plainness of it. He stepped back before she could argue, thanked Lillian, and asked Mavis to make sure room 6 got breakfast in the morning. Then he walked toward his patrol SUV through the falling snow. Elena moved carefully to the window, holding Timber against her chest. By the time she pulled the curtain aside, the red and blue lights were already turning away from the motel lot. She pressed one hand to the glass. The patrol SUV rolled onto the road, its tires cutting dark tracks through fresh snow, and disappeared toward Lake Aurora without siren, without farewell, without leaving behind a phone number. In the quiet room, the heater clicked and hummed. Timber slept inside the fold of the Navy police jacket, his small body warm at last. Elena looked down at the nameplate pinned to the fabric. "Pierce," she whispered it once, not as a debt, not even as a promise, but as a way to keep the night from swallowing the man who had refused to let the cold swallow her. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, for the first time in days, Elena stopped running. 20 years did not pass for Elena Whitcomb like a clean turn of a page. They passed in bus schedules, overdue notices, library lights, cheap coffee, and the soft sound of a dog breathing beside a rented bed. The night on East Lake Road did not become beautiful in her memory just because she had survived it. Survival did not polish fear into something gentle. For a long time, she could still wake with the feeling of snow inside her shoes and the smell of hot coolant in her throat. She remembered the old sedan trembling under her hands, the way passing headlights had slowed and then moved on, the terrible smallness of Timber's body against her chest. But memory had one detail that never froze over: the weight of a dark navy police jacket being placed around her shoulders, and a metal nameplate catching the red and blue flash of patrol lights. She did not know his first name then. She did not know that the officer carried his own winter grief. She only knew that someone had stopped. The money Callum left her did not turn her life easy. It turned it possible. Elena used part of it for the room at North Lantern, part of it for Timber's first emergency treatment, and part of it to keep her phone working long enough to call the one friend who had not given up on her. She did not spend $1 without writing it down in the back of an old notebook. Not because Officer Pierce had asked to be repaid, but because she was afraid that if she did not keep record of the kindness, the world might later convince her it had not really happened. On the first page she wrote, "Motel, dog medicine, food, battery cable, bus pass." On the inside cover, in careful block letters, she wrote the only name she had: Pierce, Lake Aurora Police. Timber survived the week, then the winter, then the first hard year of Elena's new life. He grew unevenly at first, all paws and ears and startled loyalty, his sable brown coat deepening into black along the back, while the pale mark on his chest remained like a small flame. He followed Elena from one rented room to another, slept under library tables while she studied, and learned to rest his chin on her knee whenever her breathing changed. She enrolled at Aroostook Community College with a scholarship small enough to require 2 part-time jobs and large enough to make quitting feel like betrayal. During the day, she worked in the filing room of the county courthouse, carrying boxes of old motions, traffic citations, evictions notices, and custody disputes through narrow halls that smelled of paper and floor wax. At night, she studied political science and legal writing until the words blurred. Timber slept beside her chair, one ear raised, as if guarding not just the room, but the idea that Elena was allowed to become more than what had happened to her. She did not choose law because she wanted revenge on the people who had failed her. Revenge burned hot and short. Elena needed something that would last. She chose law because the courthouse taught her that people were often lost in systems long before they were ever called guilty, negligent, unstable, unfit, or non-compliant. She saw elderly tenants who did not understand the papers that could remove them from their homes. She saw young mothers whispering to clerks because they did not know which form meant safety. She saw police officers who had done harm and police officers who had been blamed for harm someone higher up wanted hidden. The world was more complicated than the anger she had carried at 19. That realization did not weaken her. It sharpened her. She wanted to stand in the place where power turned cold and insist that someone look at the human being left outside the door. Through every exam and rejection, the police jacket stayed with her. At first she wore it because she could not afford another winter coat. The sleeves were too long, the shoulders too wide, and the fabric carried a faint scent of old leather, snow, and something cleanly disciplined that never fully left. Later, when she could finally buy her own coat, she folded the navy jacket into a cedar box with Timber's early vet papers, the notebook of expenses, and the motel receipt Mavis Doolan had printed without comment. Elena told herself she kept it only because she intended to return it. But years moved on, Lake Aurora remained a name at the top of a page, and Officer Pierce became less a person she could locate than a standard she measured herself against on the days when bitterness tried to make her smaller. Law school was harder than poverty because poverty had trained her to endure, while law school demanded that she speak. The first time Elena stood to argue in a moot courtroom, her hands shook so badly she gripped the lectern until her knuckles turned white. Timber, older then and broad-chested, waited outside with a student volunteer because dogs were not allowed inside. When Elena stepped into the hallway afterward, humiliated by how often her voice had cracked, Timber rose slowly, walked straight to her, and pressed his forehead into her stomach. She sank to the floor in her suit skirt and laughed through tears because he looked so solemn, as if he had personally objected to the entire proceeding. From then on, before every argument, she touched the small flame-shaped patch on his chest and reminded herself that fear was not a command. It was only weather. Years later, Elena became an attorney known not for softness, but for refusing to let official language hide ordinary cruelty. She worked cases involving public employees, emergency responders, whistleblowers, disciplinary boards, and citizens trapped between agencies that all claimed someone else had the authority to help. She was not naive about uniforms. She had cross-examined officers who lied, supervisors who protected reputations, and departments that treated apology as liability. Yet she also defended first responders punished for making impossible decisions under conditions no policy manual could fully imagine. She did not believe a badge made a person good. She believed a person's choices under pressure revealed whether the badge had any meaning at all. Timber lived long enough to see her first major win. He was already gray around the muzzle by then, slower on stairs, less interested in long walks, but he still lifted his head whenever Elena opened a case file late at night. On the evening she came home with the court order that cleared a paramedic wrongfully blamed for a failed rescue. She sat on the kitchen floor and read the decision aloud to him as if he were the only judge who mattered. Timber listened with patient amber eyes, then sneezed once and put his paw on the paper. Elena framed that copy, not because it was the largest case of her career, but because it was the first time she felt the line from East Lake Road extend all the way into another person's life. When Timber died, winter had just begun again. He was old, tired, and held together by Elena's devotion more than by medicine. Dr. Lillian Shore, older herself, came to Elena's apartment in Portland because Timber hated clinics in his final months. Lillian's red-brown hair had gone mostly silver, and her hands, still steady, moved with the gentleness of someone who understood that animals often carried people through years no human had witnessed. Elena lay beside Timber on the floor, one hand on the pale patch at his chest, the other gripping the old leather collar he had worn for most of his life. She did not ask him to stay. That was the final kindness and the hardest. Afterward, the apartment was so quiet that Elena found herself standing in the hall with her keys in her hand, unable to remember why she had opened the door. For 3 months, she did not take cases that required travel. She told colleagues she was catching up on research. She told clients she was reorganizing. The truth was smaller and more embarrassing. Without Timbers breathing in the room, every silence felt like the night beside the frozen lake returning to collect what it had missed. Then a rescue group called about a German shepherd no one could place. He was 6 years old, silver sable with a dark charcoal back, pale amber eyes, and a small scar nicking the edge of his left ear. He had been found near a harbor warehouse, calm with children, wary of shouting, and uninterested in proving himself to anyone. Elena said no twice. On the third call, she drove down only to sign a donation check. The dog walked out, studied her for one long moment, and placed his muzzle gently on the back of her hand. Not Timber's gesture, not a replacement, something different. An introduction. She named him Harbor because he did not drag her out of grief. He gave it a place to dock. Harbor learned the rhythm of courtrooms, elevators, late-night brief writing, and the particular kind of tension that entered Elena's shoulders before cross-examination. He wore a charcoal harness in public, a brown leather collar with a small brass nameplate at home, and in winter Elena sometimes tied a narrow navy scarf around his neck. People often assumed he was a service dog in the formal sense, but Elena called him her working companion. He did not perform tricks. He reminded her to breathe, stood quietly between her and aggressive strangers, and looked at judges with such grave attention that more than one clerk had joked he seemed ready to file an amicus brief. While Elena built her life away from Lake Aurora, Callum Pierce remained there. At 62, he had become deputy chief, though anyone expecting him to enjoy command would have been disappointed. His dark hair had turned salt and brown, silver at the temples, and the years had carved deeper lines around his eyes. He still wore the uniform with disciplined neatness, but the strength in him had shifted. At 42, he had looked like a man ready to step into the storm. At 62, he looked like a man who had learned storms had paperwork, budgets, grieving families, and after-action reports. He was respected by patrol officers because he never asked them to do anything he would not do, and disliked by certain administrators because he remembered too clearly that public safety was not meant to be a performance for town meetings. His greatest tension at the department was Chief Randall Keats, a narrow-shouldered man of 58 with steel-rimmed glasses, ash-gray hair combed too carefully, and the careful speech of someone who believed a wrong word could become a lawsuit. Keats was not corrupt, and that made him harder to dismiss. Years earlier, before he became chief, he had watched a propane explosion take 2 firefighters during a winter call that should have been routine. Since then, procedure had become more than policy to him. It was penance. He measured risk in manuals, distance, and authorization chains. Callum measured it in faces. Their arguments were rarely loud, but the whole department felt them. Keats would say, "No one enters until the specialized team clears the scene." Callum would answer, "And if the people inside are out of time?" Neither man thought himself wrong. That was the problem. As Lake Aurora prepared for Winter Lantern Week, the town brightened with the old postcard magic that tourists loved. Workers hung strands of gold lights along Main Street. Volunteers built wooden stalls for cider and maple pastries. Children painted paper lanterns in the school cafeteria. Starling Ridge Elementary, a low brick building on the east side of town, had been designated as an emergency warming site if weather-trapped families during the festival. On paper, it made sense. The school had a cafeteria, wide corridors, a gymnasium, and backup heat from an aging propane system that had served through many winters with only minor complaints. On paper, many things looked safe. 3 maintenance reports sat in a folder on the facilities director's desk. One mentioned a faint propane odor near the rear utility room. Another noted irregular pressure readings during cold mornings. The third recommended a full inspection before heavy festival use. None of the reports sounded dramatic enough to cancel anything. The facilities director, already fighting budget limits, and a mayor's office obsessed with tourist revenue, marked the issue for follow-up after Winter Lantern Week. A copy went to the town office. A summary went to the school board. A brief note landed in a packet Keats received with 24 other seasonal readiness documents. Callum saw only the last line during a planning meeting. Propane system functional, inspection pending. He circled the word pending with a black pen. Keats noticed, "If every pending inspection stops an event, we shut down the town until April." Callum looked through the conference room window at snow, falling softly over the police parking lot. Young officers were stringing temporary barricade tape in the back for festival crowd training, laughing as one of them slipped and caught himself on a cruiser. The scene should have been harmless, festive even, but Callum had lived too long with winter to trust it simply because it looked clean. "I'm not saying shut it down," he said. "I'm saying pending has a way of becoming urgent when the weather turns." Keats closed the folder. "Then we follow the emergency plan." Callum did not answer immediately. He thought of an old sedan smoking by a frozen lake, of a girl who might have become another delayed discovery if he had treated stopping as optional, of how often danger announced itself in small language before it arrived in full. Finally, he uncapped his pen again and wrote one sentence in the margin of his own copy. "Check Starling Ridge before festival night." He meant to do it himself. He meant to make the call, walk the building, ask the questions that made people sigh at him. But the week filled with staffing shortages, road closures, domestic calls made worse by weather, and meetings where everyone insisted they were prepared. By Friday afternoon, winter lantern banners snapped in the wind across Main Street. The lake shone white beneath a pale sun. Starling Ridge Elementary glowed with children's paper lanterns taped to the windows. And in a folder on Callum Pierce's desk, beneath a stack of parade route maps and overtime approvals, the circled word pending waited like a coal that had not yet gone out. The first hour of Winter Lantern Week had been almost too beautiful for warning. Main Street glowed under strings of gold bulbs, paper lanterns swayed from storefront awnings, and families moved through the snow with cups of cider warming their hands. Lake Aurora looked bright and harmless beneath the festival lights, the frozen lake reflecting every color back at the town as if winter had agreed, just for one night, to be kind. Then the wind changed. It came hard from the northeast, pushing snow sideways across the road, turning laughter into hurried goodbyes and clear lanes into white tunnels. By 7:30, dispatch was already juggling stalled vehicles, downed limbs, and families trying to leave before the roads disappeared. By 8, a school bus carrying children, teachers, and several parents from the lantern painting event was blocked near Starling Ridge Elementary by a fallen pine. The safest choice seemed obvious. Bring them into the school, use it as the emergency warming site, and wait out the worst of the storm. On paper, that was exactly what the town had planned. On the ground, plans began to shrink the moment the first propane alarm chirped in the rear utility hall. Callum Pierce arrived at Starling Ridge with his patrol lights cutting red and blue through the snow. At 62, he moved slower than he once had, but there was nothing uncertain in the way he stepped out of his vehicle and took in the scene. The school was a low brick building half buried in blowing white, its windows glowing weakly behind paper lanterns taped by children earlier that afternoon. The front doors were blocked by packed snow pushed against them by the wind. A bus sat angled near the curb, empty now, hazard lights blinking under a growing crust of ice. Near the side lot, Deputy Mara Quinn waved him in with one gloved hand, her other hand gripping the radio at her shoulder. Mara was 29, quick-eyed and usually composed, with dark blonde hair tucked under a Navy Department beanie, but tonight fear had stripped the polish from her face. "They're inside the East Wing and cafeteria," she said as Callum reached her. 32 total, 21 kids, 5 parents, 3 teachers, a custodian, a security guard, and the driver. The backup heat kicked on after the power flickered. Then staff smelled propane near the rear utility room. Callum looked past her to the back of the school. The wind shifted, and for a second the smell came to him faint but real, too clean and sharp beneath the snow. "Anyone hurt?" Security guard twisted his knee trying to force a side door. "One teacher is having asthma trouble. They're using the internal radio from the office. Cell service is bad inside." Mara swallowed. "Chief Keats says hold perimeter until Hazmat gets here from Bangor." Callum said nothing yet. He walked to the edge of the cleared path where Benton Sloan stood in turnout pants and a heavy fire coat, his red helmet tucked under one arm. Benton was 64, wide through the chest and thick through the hands, with a silver mustache rimed in snow and the blunt, smoke-rue voice of a man who did not decorate bad news. He had spent 4 decades learning what fire did when people underestimated it. "Talk to me," Callum said. Benton pointed with 2 fingers toward the back corner of the school, odors strongest near the utility room, winds pushing away from the east entrance right now. That helps. Generators cycling wrong, though. Lights inside keep dipping. If something arcs near the leak, we may have a problem. Can we vent from the east side? Maybe. It's the cleanest route, farthest from the tank and utility room. Benton's jaw tightened. But maybe is not safe. Callum looked at him. Nothing tonight is safe. The radio crackled before Benton could answer. A woman's voice came through thin and broken, fighting static in the muffled chaos behind her. "This is Elise Marlowe in the main office. Can anyone hear me?" Mara raised her radio quickly. "Starling Ridge, this is Officer Quinn. We hear you. The children are coughing. We moved them away from the rear hall. Mr. Redding can't walk. My inhaler is almost empty. The cafeteria lights keep going out." The woman tried to steady herself, and Callum heard it. The careful tone of a teacher forcing calm into a room that was beginning to lose it. "Please tell us someone is coming in." Mara looked at Callum, then at the school, then down at her radio, as if the answer might be written there. Callum took the mic. "Mrs. Marlowe, this is Deputy Chief Pierce. Keep everyone low and away from the utility side. No switches, no open flames. Keep the children together. We're working on the east entrance." The static hissed. Behind Elise's voice, a child cried for his mother. "How long?" she asked. It was not an accusation. That made it worse. Callum did not lie. As fast as we can, he switched channels. "Chief, this is Pierce. Conditions inside are deteriorating. I'm requesting authorization to open the east entrance, establish ventilation, and evacuate in small groups." Keats answered almost immediately, voice clipped and strained. "Negative. No entry until hazmat clears the gas hazard. Hazmat is 40 minutes out at best, then you hold 40 minutes. A gust shoved snow against Callum's back. He turned away from the others, lowering his voice, though everyone still heard enough. "We have children coughing, one asthmatic teacher, and an injured guard. If the generator arcs before we move them, waiting won't save anyone." Keats's breathing came through the radio, harsh at the edges. "And if you open the wrong door and feed gas toward an ignition source, you lose the whole wing. I have seen what propane does, Callum. You have not seen it the way I have." For one moment, the storm seemed to narrow around the two men and the old grief between them. Callum knew Keats was not speaking from cowardice. He could picture the chief years earlier, younger, soot-covered, watching firefighters carried out under sheets. Procedure had become Keats's way of keeping the dead from multiplying. Callum respected that. He truly did, but respect did not make the children inside breathe easier. Mara stepped closer, voice low enough that it was meant for him alone. "Sir, if we go in against orders and something happens—" She did not finish. She did not have to. Callum looked through the snow at the east doors, barely visible under the drift. He felt the weight of every rule he was about to break. He thought of badges, hearings, headlines, the clean cruelty of sentences written by people who had not stood in the wind. He thought of a school full of children waiting for adults to decide whether danger on paper mattered more than danger in their lungs. Then Elise's voice came through again, smaller this time. "Deputy Chief Pierce, one of the boys is getting sleepy. I'm trying to keep him talking." That was the moment the decision stopped being theoretical. Callum closed his eyes for half a second, not to pray exactly, but to make room for the cost. When he opened them, his voice had changed. It was quieter, heavier, and final. Mara switched to tactical. "Benton, I need your best east side path and your eyes on wind shift. Noah, stage medical at the plow line and prepare for cold exposure." Noah Bell, the EMT standing beside the rescue truck with a red medical bag slung across his shoulder, looked up sharply. He was 34, lean and fast-moving, with tired brown eyes that softened whenever he spoke to frightened people. He did not ask whether the order was authorized. He only nodded and began moving. Mara went pale. "Sir?" Callum met her eyes. "You can stay on perimeter if you need to." She looked toward the school, then to the radio in her hand, then back at the man who had trained her to respect command without surrendering judgment. Fear remained on her face, but something steadier rose underneath it. "No, sir." Benton pulled his helmet on. "East side, then. No metal strike if we can help it. Slow hands, low movement." Callum keyed the radio once more. "Chief, I am initiating emergency evacuation from the east entrance." Keats exploded through the speaker. "Pierce, you are ordered to stand down." Callum looked at the glowing windows where paper lanterns trembled behind glass. "I understand the order." He lowered the radio. He did not say he would obey it. The next minutes did not feel heroic. They felt ugly, cold, and exact. Benton and two firefighters cleared the drift around the east entrance with plastic shovels and gloved hands rather than tools that might spark against buried metal. Mara kept count over the tactical channel, voice tight but controlled. Noah set thermal blankets and oxygen near the safest line the plows had managed to hold open. Callum coordinated from the side of the doorway, one eye on Benton, one on the wind, one on the radio that kept carrying Keats's demands for him to stop. The east door was not fully jammed, but the pressure of snow and ice held it stubbornly shut. Benton worked it slowly until it gave with a groan that sounded too loud in the storm. Cold air rushed inward. Warm, stale air breathed out. Callum caught the odor again, faint but present, and motioned everyone lower. "Messieurs Marlowe," he said into the radio, "we have the east door. Bring them in groups of 5. Children first. Keep them low. No running." Inside, Elise Marlowe became a line of courage in a green cardigan and a pale winter coat dusted with ceiling plaster. She appeared at the corridor bend with the first group, one hand holding a child's mitten, the other pressed against her own chest as she fought for breath. Her dark hair stuck to her temple, and her face had the gray tint of someone running out of air but refusing to frighten anyone else. "Eyes on me," she told the children. "Penguin steps, remember? Small steps." The first 5 came out bent low, coughing, blinking at the savage cold. Noah wrapped them and moved them behind the rescue truck. Parents followed in later groups, some crying silently, some trying to turn back for children who were already out. Mara stood at the threshold and counted each person aloud. 12, 13, 14. Every number became a small act of faith. Snow blew into the corridor, swirling over the tile floor among paper lantern cutouts and dropped mittens. Callum did not enter farther than he had to. At 62, he knew his body was not the tool it once was, and the scene did not need a man proving strength. It needed someone refusing confusion. He kept the route narrow, kept the pace controlled, kept panic from spreading faster than the gas. Twice, the lights dipped to black and children screamed. Each time, Elise's voice rose from inside, hoarse but steady. "Keep walking. Follow Officer Quinn. Hands on shoulders." Then Mara's count stopped at 29. "We're missing 3. Elise leaned against the doorframe, sucking air. "Mr. Redding and Mrs. Vale. She wouldn't leave him. They're near the office," I tried. A coughing fit bent her forward. Noah reached for her, but she shook her head. Callum touched her shoulder. "You're out. Stay out." "He can't walk," she whispered. Callum looked once at Benton. The older firefighter's eyes told him everything. Limited time, worsening risk, no clean choice. Callum did not make a speech. He stepped inside with Benton and Mara at his back, moving low along the corridor as the generator thumped somewhere behind the walls. They found Mrs. Vale, a parent volunteer with blood on her sleeve from broken glass, trying to pull Gus Redding from beside the office door. Gus was in his late 60s, heavy-set, gray-faced with pain, his right leg twisted under him. "Leave me," he rasped, which people only said when they were terrified others might obey. "Not tonight," Callum said. Benton took most of Gus's weight. Mara guided Mrs. Vale ahead. Callum supported the old guard from the other side, feeling the strain bite into his lower back, feeling age answer in his bones. The corridor seemed longer leaving than entering. The lights flickered again. Somewhere behind them, near the rear utility hall, a sharp electrical pop cracked through the building. Benton's head snapped toward the sound. Move. They did. Not fast enough to be reckless, not slow enough to be safe. The east door widened ahead like a cut in the storm. Mara pushed Mrs. Vale through first. Benton and Callum brought Gus across the threshold as Noah and another EMT reached in to take him. Callum had one boot outside when the rear of the building flashed white-orange. The blast was not the great fireball everyone feared, but it was violent enough to punch a deep thud through the walls and blow a cloud of smoke and insulation from the utility side. The shockwave knocked Benton sideways into the brick edge of the entrance. He hit hard, shoulder first, and went down with a sound that made Mara cry out his name. For several seconds, the world became nothing but snow, alarms, coughing, and the ringing inside Callum's skull. Then sound returned in pieces. Children sobbing behind the rescue truck, Noah shouting for a trauma bag, Mara saying, "Benton, stay with me," Keats's voice on the dropped radio, furious and afraid, demanding a status report. Callum pushed himself upright and looked toward the line of rescued children wrapped in blankets under the lights. 32 civilians, all out, alive. He turned back to Benton, who was conscious but clutching his shoulder, teeth bared against pain. The rear corner of Starling Ridge smoked against the night, black stains crawling up the brick where children's lanterns had glowed an hour earlier. The town would call this a miracle before morning. Callum already knew others would call it evidence. He stood in the snow, breath ragged, uniform dusted with ash, and understood with absolute clarity that he had opened the door in time. He also ensured that opening it had just placed his name on the other side of a fight that would not end tonight. By morning, Lake Aurora had learned how to tell two stories about the same night. In the first story, Deputy Chief Callum Pierce had opened a frozen school door when children were coughing behind it, and 32 people had come out alive because he refused to wait for help that was too far away. In the second story, the same man had violated a direct order, moved personnel into a propane hazard, triggered a chain of events that injured a firefighter, and left Starling Ridge Elementary with a blackened rear wall and a collapsed utility roof. Both stories traveled through town before the plows finished clearing Main Street. One moved in handwritten cards, in parents standing outside the police station with flowers and paper lanterns damp from snow, in a little girl who drew Callum with a square blue coat and the words "Thank you for opening the door." The other moved in insurance emails, emergency meetings, council statements, legal memos, and a local headline asking a question that sounded neutral only to people who did not know how headlines worked. Did Lake Aurora's deputy chief go too far? Callum saw neither story clearly at first. He spent the first hours after the rescue at the hospital, not for himself, though Noah Bell insisted on checking the ringing in his ears and the scrape across his cheek, but because Benton Sloan was there with his shoulder strapped and his face gray from pain. Benton had a fractured collarbone and deep bruising where the blast had thrown him into the brick edge of the school entrance. "Don't look at me like I'm dead," Benton growled from the exam bed when Callum stepped in. "I've had hangovers worse than this. Your wife believe that?" Callum asked. Benton snorted, then winced. "My wife believes I'm an idiot. She's usually right." The exchange should have eased something, but Callum could not stop looking at the sling, the hospital bracelet, the soot still caught in Benton's silver mustache. "I made the call," he said quietly. Benton's eyes sharpened. "Yes, you did. You got hurt because of it." "I got hurt because a school had a bad propane system, a bad generator, and a town full of people who thought inspection pending meant safe enough. Don't carry my shoulder around like it belongs to you." Callum wanted to accept that. He could not fully. Responsibility had always been different from guilt, but people often confused them when they needed one man to hold what many hands had dropped. By noon, the parents' flowers were still outside the station, but so were television vans. Reporters stood beneath hoods and umbrellas, using the school's damaged rear wall as a background whenever they could get a clear angle. The mayor issued a careful statement praising the courage of all responders, while promising a full review of command decisions made during the incident. The phrase "full review" settled over the department like freezing rain. Inside the municipal building, Chief Randall Keats sat at the end of a conference table under fluorescent lights that made everyone look unwell. His steel-rimmed glasses lay folded beside a stack of printed reports. Across from him sat Rhea Caldwell, the town manager, a polished woman in her early 50s whose silver bob and burgundy suit gave her the air of someone who could cut a budget line without raising her voice. Beside her, an insurance representative clicked a pen open and closed, while the school board chair stared at photographs of the damaged utility wing as if enough staring might make the cost smaller. "We need the record clear," Caldwell said. The town followed its emergency plan. The school was designated appropriately. The chief issued a lawful safety order. Deputy Chief Pierce chose to disregard that order. Keats looked at the report in front of him. The words were organized. That made them feel less honest. He also removed 32 civilians from the building before the blast. "No one is denying the outcome," Caldwell replied. "We are discussing exposure. If we allow the narrative that the order to wait was wrong, then every delayed maintenance note becomes discoverable in civil litigation. Every parent's attorney will ask why Starling Ridge was used as a warming site at all." The insurance man finally stopped clicking his pen. "And if Pierce acted outside command authorization, liability shifts." Keats looked up slowly. "You want me to say he acted alone?" Caldwell did not blink. "I want the official record to reflect the chain of command." For a moment, Keats saw another winter, another cloud of orange fire, 2 helmets on the snow, and the sound of someone screaming that the line should have been held. He had built his career after that on one belief: rules kept grief from multiplying. Yet now the rules were being arranged around a living man like a fence. He rubbed the old burn mark on the back of his hand, a small pale patch most people never noticed. He requested authorization. Keats said. "I denied it." Then he disobeyed. The room became very still. Keats did not answer quickly enough, and Caldwell leaned forward. "Randall, if this becomes a town failure, it will not stop with Pierce. It will reach your office, mine, facilities, the school board, and the mayor. People will lose careers. The town may lose its insurer. The parents are grateful today. Tomorrow, attorneys will begin calling them. Keats closed his eyes briefly. He was not a villain in his own mind. He was a man who had spent years trying to prevent the exact sentence now being pushed toward Callum. Someone has to answer for this. When he opened his eyes, the tiredness in them was almost worse than anger. "I'll initiate administrative suspension pending investigation," he said. Caldwell nodded once, as if a door had locked neatly. Callum received the notice at 3:40 that afternoon in his office. The flowers were visible from his window, bright shapes against snow. Mara Quinn stood outside his door when the Internal Affairs lieutenant left, her face pale with fury she did not know where to put. "They can't do this," she said. Her beanie was gone, her hair pulled back badly, as if she had been running her hands through it all day. "They can," Callum answered, reading the paper again though the words had not changed. "Administrative suspension. Pending criminal review. Unauthorized tactical action. Reckless endangerment. Improper command override. Contribution to property damage and responder injury." Each phrase tried to make the night smaller, cleaner, less full of children's coughing. "Sir, I'll tell them exactly what happened. You'll tell the truth," Callum said. "Not more. Not less. The truth is they were dying in there." He looked at her then, and she saw the exhaustion he had kept hidden from the younger officers for years. "Truth has to survive paperwork, Mara. That's harder than surviving weather." By evening, the union sent Thomas Vale, a police labor attorney with soft hands, a loosened tie, and the practiced sympathy of a man who spent his days helping good officers accept bad compromises. He met Callum in a side room at the station, away from the windows and cameras. "They're offering a retirement resolution," Vale said, sliding a folder across the table. "Early retirement, partial pension protection, no jail exposure, reduced administrative finding. You'd keep most of your reputation with the public." Callum did not touch the folder. "What do I have to sign?" Vale hesitated, and that was enough. "Read it," Vale sighed. "A statement acknowledging that your actions were emotionally driven, that you exceeded safe operational boundaries, and that your decision unnecessarily increased risk to minors, civilians, and emergency personnel." The room seemed to lose temperature. Callum looked at the folder as if it contained something rotten. "Unnecessarily. It's language. It's a lie. It is a negotiated sentence that keeps you out of a criminal courtroom." Callum leaned back. At 62, he had imagined many endings to his career: a quiet retirement party he would dislike, a box of plaques he would leave in a closet, maybe a final winter shift where nothing happened and he could hand the job to someone younger without feeling the town had become less safe. He had not imagined being asked to purchase peace by signing away the reason 32 people were alive. "I won't do it." Vale folded his hands. "Callum, listen to me. The town is moving fast because they are scared. If prosecutors file reckless endangerment, the press will turn ugly. People love heroes until lawyers tell them heroes cost money. You could lose the pension, the title, the badge, everything. I opened the correct door. That may be morally true and legally complicated. Then let it be complicated." Vale studied him for a long moment, frustration giving way to something like sorrow. "You're willing to go to trial over one sentence?" Callum stood and pushed the folder back. "I'm willing to go to trial because children were behind a door and someone had to decide they mattered more than a clean report." The story reached national news 2 days later, not as a full account, but as a segment squeezed between a weather disaster and a political scandal. In Portland, Elena Whitcomb was reviewing a disciplinary file at her kitchen table when Harbour lifted his head from beside her chair. He had learned the sound her silence made when something inside her changed. On the television, a reporter stood in front of Starling Ridge Elementary, speaking over footage of smoke-stained brick and parents leaving flowers outside the Lake Aurora Police Department. Then the screen showed a still photograph of Callum Pierce. Older, silver at the temples, deeper lines around the eyes, but the posture was the same. Disciplined, tired, unwilling to disappear. Elena's pen stopped moving. Harbour rose quietly and came to her side. The reporter said his full name again: Deputy Chief Callum Pierce, Lake Aurora, suspended after unauthorized evacuation. Possible criminal charges. Elena did not breathe for several seconds. Then she stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. In the bedroom closet, behind winter coats she had bought with her own money, sat a cedar box she had not opened in months. Harbor followed, not crowding her, only present. Elena knelt and lifted the lid. The old Navy police jacket lay folded inside, heavier in memory than in fabric. The nameplate was still pinned to the front, Pierce. Beneath it were Timber's first vet papers from North Lantern, a motel receipt faded almost yellow, a notebook page listing every dollar spent after the storm, and Timber's old red-brown collar. Elena touched the collar first. That surprised her. Not the coat, not the name, but the worn leather that had held all the years between one rescue and another. Harbor lowered his muzzle and rested it gently near the collar without touching it, as if he understood there were some griefs even loyalty should approach carefully. Elena looked back at the television, where commentators were already turning Callum into a symbol neither side truly knew. Reckless officer, courageous rescuer, chain of command failure, small-town hero. She turned the volume off. "No," she said softly, "not like that." She did not call the number scrolling beneath the news report. She did not rush to Lake Aurora carrying an old coat and a dramatic story. Emotion had saved her once, but it had not made her a lawyer. Discipline had. She spent the next 48 hours working like she would for any client whose life was being narrowed by official language. She pulled public records, old staffing rosters, local archives, emergency management plans, school board minutes, maintenance summaries, and every media clip she could find. She confirmed what memory alone could not be allowed to prove. Officer Callum Pierce had been on duty the night her sedan died on East Lake Road. North Lantern Motor Inn still existed under new ownership, and its old ledger had been digitized by the County Historical Tax Project. Dr. Lillian Shore's clinic records showed an emergency canine visit that same night, paid by C. Pierce. The man on the news was not just a name from a coat. He was the man who had stopped. Only after the facts matched did Elena make the call. Thomas Vale sounded exhausted when he answered. "Miss Whitcomb, unless you're press, I don't have a comment." "I'm not press. I'm a civil defense attorney. I handle public duty and emergency discretion cases. Your client needs outside counsel before the town's version hardens." A pause. "Do you know Deputy Chief Pierce?" Elena looked at the cedar box, still open on the floor. Not in the way he would remember. She arrived in Lake Aurora 3 days later, under a pale winter sun that made the town look innocent again. Harbor stepped out of the car beside her, silver sable coat bright against the snow, charcoal harness neat along his shoulders, scarred left ear twitching at the cold. Elena wore a dark navy suit under a camel wool coat, her hair tied low, her brown leather case in one hand. Inside the Lake Aurora station, officers fell quiet when she entered. Some looked hopeful, some looked suspicious. Callum waited in a conference room stripped of warmth. 1 table, 4 chairs, a pitcher of water no one had touched. He rose when she entered, still tall, still controlled, though suspension had removed the uniform from him. In a charcoal sweater and dark coat, he looked less like a symbol and more like an aging man forced to defend the clearest decision of his life. Harbor did not rush him. The dog simply paused, studied Callum with pale amber eyes, then stood calmly at Elena's left side. Callum nodded to her. "Mrs. Whitcomb." There was no recognition in his face. Elena felt the old coat in her mind like a hand against her shoulder. She did not reach for that memory. "Not yet. Deputy Chief Pierce," she said. "I've reviewed the public record, the emergency timeline, and the preliminary allegations. Then you know I disobeyed a direct order." "Yes." Her answer made Thomas Vale shift uncomfortably beside her. Callum's eyes sharpened. Elena placed her case on the table but did not sit. "I'm not here to turn you into a hero. Heroes are easy to praise and easier to abandon when invoices arrive. I'm here because the question is larger than whether you broke the chain of command." Callum watched her, guarded now. Harbor moved only once, placing his muzzle briefly against Elena's hand before returning to stillness. She let the gesture steady her. "If an order keeps everyone standing outside while people inside are running out of air," she said, voice clear in the small room, "then who is truly putting lives at risk?" For the first time since the school door opened, Callum had no immediate answer. Not because he doubted what he had done, but because someone had finally asked the question without first trying to bury him under the answer. Snow fell lightly over Lake Aurora on the morning of the trial, not with the violence of festival night, but with the soft patience of something that had no interest in human urgency. The courthouse stood at the edge of the town square, an old granite building with narrow windows and steps worn smooth by decades of boots, grief, arguments, and verdicts. Across the street, parents gathered in small clusters beneath bare maple trees, some holding folded signs that said, "Thank you, Pierce," others standing quietly because gratitude felt too private to put on cardboard. A few reporters had come from Portland and Bangor, their vans idled near the curb, antennae raised. Cameras pointed at the courthouse doors as if truth might appear there in a single image. Inside, the courtroom was colder than it should have been. Maybe it was the old heating system. Maybe it was the fact that nearly everyone in the room had chosen a side before hearing the first witness. Callum Pierce sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit that made him look less like a police commander and more like an aging man asked to defend the shape of his own conscience. No badge, no shoulder patch, no radio at his collar. Without the uniform, the lines around his eyes seemed deeper, and the stillness in him seemed heavier. Thomas Vale sat to one side with union paperwork stacked neatly in front of him, but it was Elena Whitcomb who stood when the bailiff called the room to order. She wore a tailored navy suit, her hair tied low, her brown leather case resting beside her chair. Harbor lay quietly at her feet in a charcoal harness, silver sable coat bright against the dark floor, his head down but eyes open, taking in every breath and footstep. Judge Miriam Halverson entered without drama. She was in her late 60s, with iron gray hair cut short, a narrow face, and the kind of calm that did not ask for respect because it had long ago learned how to command it. She had served the county for nearly 30 years and was known for disliking theater, especially when theater dressed itself as justice. "This court is now in session," she said, taking her seat. "The matter before us is the state of Maine versus Callum Pierce." The prosecutor, Malcolm Reeves, rose from the opposite table. He was a compact man in a black suit, with smooth hands and a voice trained to sound reasonable even when sharpening a blade. He did not sneer at Callum. That would have been easier to fight. He spoke with sorrowful precision. "Your Honor, this case is not about whether children were rescued. Everyone in this room is relieved that the civilians inside Starling Ridge survived. This case is about whether a senior law enforcement officer may disregard a lawful safety order, direct subordinates into a known propane hazard, and then claim a favorable outcome excuses reckless conduct. Deputy Chief Pierce was ordered to hold the perimeter until trained hazardous materials personnel arrived. He chose instead to improvise. A firefighter was injured. A public school suffered catastrophic damage. The fact that the night did not end worse does not erase the danger he created. The words settled over the room. Some parents shifted angrily. A firefighter in the back muttered under his breath until the judge looked up. Elena did not react. She wrote one phrase on her legal pad, not because she needed it, but because writing steadied the pace of her anger. Favorable outcome. As if 32 living people were merely an outcome, as if breath were a detail. When Reeves finished, Elena stood slowly. She did not walk toward the jury box because there was no jury. Judge Halvorsen had agreed to hear the matter as a bench trial, given the urgency of the criminal charges and the public pressure surrounding them. Elena remained near the defense table, one hand lightly touching the top of a folder. "Your Honor, the prosecution wants this case to begin after the most important facts have already been removed. They want the court to see an order, a violation, and an injury. We will show the full timeline. We will show the weather conditions. We will show the estimated arrival time of hazmat. We will show the location of the propane leak, the failing generator, the blocked exits, the medical condition of the civilians inside, and the maintenance warnings that existed before that school was ever used as a warming site." Deputy Chief Pierce did disobey an order. "We will not pretend otherwise, but necessity is not lawlessness. Judgment is not recklessness simply because it offends a chain of command after the fact. The question before this court is not whether Callum Pierce broke procedure. The question is whether procedure in that moment, still served the lives it was meant to protect. Callum looked down at his hands. He had expected her to deny nothing. Still, hearing his disobedience spoken plainly by his own attorney brought a strange relief. Elena was not building him a costume. She was building a place where the truth could stand without pretending to be cleaner than it was. Reeves called Chief Randall Keats first. Keats wore his dress uniform, every line pressed, every button controlled. His steel-rimmed glasses caught the courtroom lights, and the old pale burn mark on his hand showed when he lifted it to swear the oath. He testified that Starling Ridge had been treated as a potential propane incident, that the standard safety perimeter required waiting for hazmat, and that he had given Callum a direct order not to enter. Under Reeves's questions, Keats sounded steady, almost painfully careful. He explained the danger of propane pooling low, the risk of ignition from electrical systems, the unpredictability of opening doors in a compromised structure. He was not lying. That made the testimony heavier. When Elena rose to cross-examine him, the room seemed to lean in. "Chief Keats," she began, "you have first-hand experience with propane explosions, correct?" Keats's mouth tightened. "Yes. A prior incident in 2009 killed 2 firefighters under your command." Reeves objected to relevance, but Halverson allowed it. Keats answered, quieter now. "Yes." Elena's voice softened slightly, not as a tactic, but as a boundary. "That experience shaped your approach to gas-related calls. It made me respect them, understandably. On the night of Winter Lantern Week, when you ordered Deputy Chief Pierce to hold the perimeter, were you physically at Starling Ridge?" "No. I was coordinating from command at the Municipal Emergency Center, so you did not personally hear the children coughing over the internal radio?" "No." "You did not personally observe Miss Marlowe's respiratory distress?" "No." "You did not personally see the snow blocking the east entrance?" "No." "You did not know, when you gave the order to wait, that the generator had begun cycling irregularly within the building?" Keats hesitated. "I knew there were power fluctuations, not the same thing." "Did you know the generator was cycling close enough to the affected utility wing to increase ignition concern?" He looked at the report in front of him as if it might offer mercy. "Not at the time of the order." Elena let the answer remain in the air before continuing. "You ordered waiting because waiting is usually safer." "Yes. But you did not have complete information about how quickly conditions inside were deteriorating." Keats removed his glasses, cleaned them once with a cloth, and put them back on. "No. And if the people inside had lost consciousness before hazmat arrived, the order to wait would not have protected them." Reeves rose. "Objection. Calls for speculation." Judge Halverson looked at Keats, then at Elena, sustained as phrased. Elena nodded. "Chief Keats, was the purpose of your order to save lives?" "Of course. If an order cannot respond to changing facts on scene, who is responsible for recognizing that change?" Keats looked for the first time not at Elena but at Callum. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it changed the temperature of the room. "The incident commander on scene," he said. Reeves shifted in his chair. Elena did not press further. She had opened the door she needed. The next witnesses built the night minute by minute. Elise Marlowe testified in a cream sweater under a brown blazer, her inhaler visible in the side pocket of her bag. She spoke with the measured patience of a teacher used to making frightened children understand complicated things. She described moving students away from the rear hall, telling them to crouch low, counting heads in the dim cafeteria as the lights flickered. Her voice broke only once, when she described a boy named Henry becoming too sleepy to answer her questions. "I kept asking him about his paper lantern," she said. "It was blue with yellow stars. I made him tell me how many stars he painted, because I was afraid if he stopped talking, he would not start again." Noah Bell testified next, explaining the medical risks of cold exposure, panic, and possible inhalation in children. A propane systems expert, Dr. Anika Brandt, used diagrams to show the leak's likely origin, wind direction, and the relative safety of the east entrance compared with the rear utility side. She was precise, unsentimental, and devastating. "Was Deputy Chief Pierce's plan risk-free?" Elena asked. "No emergency evacuation under those conditions was risk-free," Brandt replied. "Was waiting risk-free? No. Based on the data available now, which option presented the lowest probable loss of life?" Reeves objected. Halvorsen allowed the answer. Brandt looked at the diagrams, then at the judge. Controlled evacuation through the east entrance, provided no spark-producing tools were used and movement remained low and limited. In the back row, someone began to cry quietly. Callum did not turn around. He could feel the courtroom shifting, but he did not let himself trust it. He had spent too many years at scenes where hope arrived early and left before the paperwork was done. Then Benton Sloan walked in. He refused the wheelchair offered by the bailiff and came forward on his own feet, one arm strapped across his chest, his red fire department jacket hanging loose over a plaid shirt. His silver mustache twitched when he sat, annoyed by the stiffness of the chair. The oath sounded almost strange in his smoke-roof voice, as if everyone in the room already knew he considered lying inefficient. Reeves questioned him first, emphasizing his injury. Benton confirmed the fracture. He confirmed the blast. He confirmed Callum had initiated evacuation against Keats's order. Reeves asked, "Would you agree that entering the building increased the danger to emergency personnel?" Benton looked at him. "Getting out of bed increases danger." "Be specific." A few people in the gallery exhaled almost like laughter, but the judge's glance ended it. Reeves tightened his jaw. "Did Deputy Chief Pierce's unauthorized action place you in harm's way?" Benton looked toward Callum, then back at Reeves. "The school placed me in harm's way. The leak placed me in harm's way. The generator placed me in harm's way. Pierce placed me at the east door because that was the best bad option we had." Reeves sat down sooner than he had intended. Elena approached slowly. She did not ask Benton to perform gratitude. She asked him about wind, door location, the smell of propane, the blocked exits, the plastic shovels, the decision not to use metal tools, the count of civilians coming out. Benton answered each one plainly. Then Elena paused. "Mr. Sloan, before Deputy Chief Pierce initiated evacuation, did you personally want to wait for hazmat?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I've seen gas calls go wrong." "What changed your mind?" Benton leaned back carefully, pain flickering across his face. "The numbers. Explain that." He looked at Judge Halvorsen. Hazmat was 40 minutes out if roads stayed passable. The kids were already coughing. Teacher was losing air. Guard couldn't walk. Generator was acting like a drunk. Wind was in our favor for the east door, but it could shift any minute. Waiting felt safer because we were outside. It wasn't safer for the people inside. Elena let that settle before asking her final question. "Do you believe you were injured because Deputy Chief Pierce acted recklessly?" Benton's good hand curled slowly on the rail of the witness box. "No. I was injured because that school should have been fixed before children were ever sent inside it. Pierce didn't create the emergency. He was the first man willing to own it." The courtroom went utterly still. Even Reeves did not object. Callum lowered his eyes, not in defeat, but because the words had struck somewhere he had been trying not to touch. Responsibility had felt like a weight he deserved. Benton had not removed it. He had named where it belonged. Elena turned from the witness stand and opened the last set of folders. These were not dramatic photographs or emotional letters. They were maintenance reports, email chains, inspection requests, budget notes, and seasonal readiness summaries. Paper, plain and bloodless. The kind of paper that could move a hazard from one desk to another without ever forcing anyone to stand in front of a child and explain why warmth had become poison. She entered them one by one. A faint propane odor reported 3 weeks before the festival. Pressure irregularities logged twice. A recommendation for full inspection before public use. A town office note delaying non-critical repairs until after Winter Lantern Week. A school board summary reducing inspection recommended to system functional. No villain leapt from the pages. No single signature explained everything. That was the terrible part. The failure had been ordinary. Everyone had done something small enough to defend, and together those small defensible choices had built a room full of trapped children. In her closing statement, Elena did not raise her voice. Deputy Chief Pierce is not on trial because he ignored danger. He is here because he recognized danger after others had made it invisible through paperwork. The state has shown he disobeyed. We agree. But disobedience in an emergency is not automatically recklessness. Recklessness is ignoring the risk. The evidence shows the opposite. He considered the leak, the wind, the generator, the blocked exits, the medical distress, and the arrival time of specialized help. He selected the least dangerous option left. The law does not require a person to stand outside a door and listen to children fade because a safer team is 40 minutes away. She turned slightly toward Callum, but did not look long enough to make the moment sentimental. Procedure exists to protect life. When procedure is used after the fact to protect institutions from embarrassment, it stops being safety and becomes shelter for cowardice. Judge Halverson took nearly an hour to return with her ruling. No one spoke much while they waited. Harbour rested his muzzle on Elena's shoe. Callum stared at the grain of the defense table and thought, not of his career, but of the boy with the blue lantern. When the judge came back, the room rose as one. Halverson read from notes, but her eyes lifted often. This court does not find that Deputy Chief Pierce's actions were without consequence. He exceeded a direct order. He assumed authority beyond the command structure. A firefighter was injured, and public property sustained serious damage. Those facts matter. Callum held still. Elena did too. However, the judge continued, the state has not proven criminal recklessness. The evidence demonstrates that conditions inside Starling Ridge were changing rapidly, that the order to wait was issued without complete scene information, and that Deputy Chief Pierce's evacuation plan was controlled, reasoned, and directed toward preventing imminent harm. Necessity does not erase every procedural violation, but it may defeat criminal blame. The charges are dismissed. A sound moved through the courtroom, not applause exactly, but breath returning to many bodies at once. Judge Halverson struck the gavel once before it could become disorder. Additionally, this court orders the town to preserve and disclose all maintenance records related to Starling Ridge's propane system, emergency warming site designation, and festival readiness review. Copies will be provided to relevant civil authorities. This court strongly recommends immediate revision of emergency response protocols concerning on-scene discretion when delayed specialized response creates imminent risk to civilians. Callum closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, he was not smiling. Relief had come, but it had not come clean. Across the aisle, Keith sat rigid, face pale, understanding that the ruling had saved Callum from criminal conviction but opened the town's locked cabinets. Parents cried. Firefighters gripped Benton's uninjured shoulder. Reporters rushed for the doors. Elena gathered her folders with steady hands. Thomas Vale whispered something about reinstatement. Callum barely heard him. He looked at the space where a uniform should have been on his chest and understood that being cleared was not the same as going back. The court had said he was not a criminal. It had not answered how a town should change, so no one else had to choose between a lawful order and a breathing child behind a frozen door. The courthouse emptied the way a storm sometimes clears, not all at once but in restless fragments. Reporters hurried toward the front steps with phones pressed to their ears, trying to turn Judge Halverson's ruling into sentences short enough for evening broadcasts. Parents lingered in the hallway, some crying openly now that the pressure to remain composed had finally passed. Firefighters gathered around Benton Sloan, careful not to touch his injured shoulder while still finding ways to clap his back, grip his hand, or stand close enough to say what men like them rarely said out loud. Thomas Vale spoke to Callum about reinstatement procedures, union filings, and formal notifications, but the words moved around him without landing. Callum Pierce heard enough to nod at the right moments. The charges were dismissed. The town would have to disclose the maintenance records. His name would not carry a criminal conviction. His pension, his title, his badge. All of those things might return in some official form. Yet none of it felt like walking back into the life he had left before the school door opened. A man could be cleared by a court and still understand that something inside him had crossed a line no ruling could uncross. He slipped away before the reporters noticed, not dramatically, not like a man hiding from victory, but like someone who had spent too many years at accident scenes to enjoy crowds around survival. A side corridor led past an old records room, down a narrow stairwell, and out through a rear door behind the courthouse. The air outside was pale and cold. Snow drifted lightly through the late afternoon, softening the stone edges of the building and the iron fence that bordered the churchyard next door. Across the square, Lake Aurora glowed under a thin winter sun, its frozen surface reflecting the town's lamps before evening had fully arrived. Farther down, near the road that led toward Starling Ridge, children and parents were setting small paper lanterns along the cleared sidewalk. They moved slowly, solemnly, as if decorating the town not for celebration but for remembrance. Blue lanterns, yellow stars, red hearts, crooked trees painted by young hands. Callum recognized one child from the rescue footage, the boy Elise Marlowe had kept awake by asking about his lantern. He was bundled in a green coat now, alive enough to argue with another child about where the next lantern should go. Callum looked away before gratitude could become too sharp to bear. Near the old church wall, where snow collected in the cracks between stones, he stopped and let himself breathe without instruction. For the first time in days, no one was asking him to explain, defend, confess, apologize, or accept praise. He was simply an old policeman standing in the cold, free and not free, relieved and not relieved, trying to decide what a man was supposed to do after the law had spared him, but the truth had asked for more. He heard Harbor before he saw Elena. Not a bark, not claws scraping, just the soft compression of snow under careful paws. The German shepherd came around the corner of the churchyard at Elena's left side, silver sable coat bright against the white ground, dark charcoal back flecked with snow. Elena walked beside him in her camel wool coat over the navy suit she had worn in court, her leather case in one hand, her face no longer arranged for argument. In the courtroom she had been precise, almost severe, each question placed like a stone in a bridge. Out here, under the falling snow, she looked younger and older at once. The victory had not made her lighter. It had only removed the armor she needed to carry it. "I thought I might find you away from the cameras," she said. Callum gave a faint, tired smile. That obvious to anyone who watched you during the ruling. Harbor moved ahead of her then, not pulling, only choosing. He stopped in front of Callum, lifted his pale amber eyes, and placed his muzzle gently into Callum's open hand. The gesture was quiet enough that no one across the square would have noticed. But Callum felt his chest tighten. The cold air, the weight of a dog's trust, the memory of wet fur trembling beneath a navy coat, something old stirred at the edge of recognition. He looked down at Harbor's scarred left ear, at the calm intelligence in the dog's face, and for one suspended second the years between then and now seemed less like time than snow piled against a door. "He doesn't usually greet people that way," Elena said softly. Callum stroked the dog's head once, still looking at him. "Maybe he has better judgment than most of us." Elena did not laugh. She set her leather case on the low stone wall and opened it with deliberate care. Callum expected documents, perhaps the ruling, perhaps a statement he needed to sign. Instead, she removed a folded bundle wrapped in protective cloth. She held it for a moment before unfastening the cover. Dark navy fabric appeared beneath her hands, a winter police jacket, older now, the edges worn smooth, the heavy zipper dulled with age, the stitching still strong. Pinned to the front was a scratched metal nameplate, de Pirk. Callum stared at it without understanding at first. The mind had strange protections. It could hold the memory of a night clearly and still refuse, for a moment, to connect it to the person standing in front of him. He saw the coat, knew it had been his, and yet the meaning arrived slowly, like headlights emerging through snow. Elena watched him with no demand in her expression. She did not rush the revelation. She had waited 20 years. She could wait another breath. "East Lake Road," she said, "a sedan with a cracked coolant hose, north of mile marker 12. A girl in a cream sweater who kept saying she couldn't take your money. A German shepherd puppy coughing inside your coat." Callum's hand stilled on Harbor's head. The church bell above them gave a low, delayed sound as the wind moved through the tower. "Elena," he said, but now her name carried a different weight, not the name of his attorney, but the name of a frightened 19-year-old he had pulled back from the edge of a winter road. "You remember." "Not all at once," he admitted. His voice had gone rough. "Pieces, the smoke, the dog. You asked for my number. You said no." Her smile trembled, not with hurt, but with the old astonishment of it. "You told me to keep the coat until I didn't need it." He looked at the jacket again. The front pocket had a small repaired tear he recognized. The collar was slightly faded where weather and time had touched it. He had not thought about that coat in years, not because he had forgotten the night entirely, but because he had trained himself not to keep accounts of kindness. You stopped, you helped, you moved on. That was how he had survived a life full of emergencies too large to carry home. Timber, he said suddenly. That was his name. Elena's fingers closed around the folded fabric. Yes. She reached into her coat pocket and brought out a small red-brown leather collar, worn soft from years of use. The brass tag was old, the letters faint but readable. Timber. Harbour lowered his head when she held it, calm and respectful, as if he understood this was not an object to sniff or claim. He lived a long time, Elena said, longer than Dr. Shore expected after that first night. He came with me through community college, law school, bad apartments, worse jobs, and my first courtroom loss. He was there the first time I won a case that mattered. He died a few winters ago. Callum took the news as if learning of the death of someone he had known, though in truth he had only held the puppy's life in his decision for one night. I'm sorry. I know. Elena looked across the square toward the lanterns. That night, I thought you saved my dog. Later, I realized you saved the part of me that still believed help could arrive without a hook in it. Callum turned away slightly, not from her, but from the emotion rising too quickly. He had faced prosecutors, burning buildings, grieving families, and command hearings with steadier hands than this. I didn't know what happened to you. You weren't supposed to. That was the gift. She folded the collar back into her palm. For years I wanted to find you. Then, when I became a lawyer, I understood why you hadn't left a number. You didn't want a frightened girl to spend her life feeling owned by a favor. Callum's eyes stayed on the coat. I also didn't want to be thanked. That too. A faint smile touched her mouth. You were very stubborn for a man freezing in a uniform shirt. He almost smiled. Then the weight returned. You didn't have to take my case. Yes, she said, I did. Before he could object, she shook her head. Not because I owed you. That would make this too small. I took your case because I recognized the shape of what was happening. People were trying to turn a human emergency into a paperwork failure and hand it to the nearest person with enough integrity to carry blame. I have spent my career fighting that. You were not my exception, Callum. You were one of the reasons I learned where to stand. The use of his first name, spoken without ceremony, moved through him more deeply than praise. Around them, snow fell on the church wall, on the courthouse roof, on the square where the children had begun lighting the lanterns one by one. Harbour leaned lightly against Elena's leg, grounding her as surely as he had in the courtroom. She held out the jacket. I thought I was returning this. Callum did not take it. And now I think maybe it belongs somewhere neither of us can keep it alone. He looked from the coat to the lanterns, then to the courthouse door through which he had entered that morning as a defendant. For years his work had been defined by response, arrive, assess, act, report. But Starling Ridge had shown him that response was not enough if the next generation was trained only to obey orders until the forms were complete. I can't go back to the desk the same way, he said. Elena nodded as if she had been waiting for him to say it, not pushing him toward the thought, but trusting he would arrive there. Then don't. The next week, Callum declined a quiet reinstatement to his old deputy chief duties. The decision surprised the department more than the ruling had. Chief Keats, pale and diminished after the maintenance disclosures began spreading through town offices, did not argue. In a private meeting, he slid a formal restoration letter across his desk and said, You earned the right to return. Callum read it, then set it down. I earned the responsibility not to pretend returning is enough. Keats looked at him for a long while. The old burn mark on his hand showed as he folded his fingers together. What are you asking for? Training authority, emergency discretion, scenario review. A protocol for when delayed specialized response puts civilians at imminent risk. Not permission for officers to ignore orders, a way to teach them how to think when orders and facts stop matching. Keats's face tightened at the phrase, but he did not reject it. Maybe the trial had broken something in him, maybe it had opened something. And Ms. Whitcomb? Independent legal advisor, Callum said. If she'll agree. Elena did. So did Benton, once his doctor cleared him to shout at recruits without lifting anything heavy. Noah Bell helped build the medical decision sections. Mara Quinn, who had once stood trembling at the east entrance with a radio in her hand, became the first young officer to help teach the field exercises. The program was named the Warm Door Protocol, though Callum disliked titles and lost the argument unanimously. The first class met 6 weeks later in a refurbished training room at the Lake Aurora Police Department. Outside the windows, Starling Ridge Elementary stood repaired across the snowy field, its new utility wing inspected, vented, and marked with bright safety signage that made Benton grunt with approval. Children played in the yard during recess, their coats flashing red and blue and green against the snow. Inside the training room, a dozen young officers sat at folding tables beside firefighters, EMTs, and school staff. At the front of the room, mounted not like a trophy but like a warning, hung the old Navy police jacket. The nameplate Pierce remained on it. Beside the frame was a photograph of Timber as a young dog, ears uneven, flame-shaped patch bright on his chest, and beneath both was a simple line printed in black letters: "Open the door before the cold winds." Callum stood before the class in a gray sweater and dark field jacket, no badge on display, no attempt to look larger than the lesson. Elena sat near the side wall with Harbor resting at her feet, her legal pad open but untouched. Benton leaned in the back with his sling gone but his shoulder still stiff, and Mara waited near the training board with a stack of scenario cards. Callum let the room settle. He looked at the young officers, at their polished boots and eager faces, at the way some of them glanced at the coat and then quickly away. "One day," he began, "you may stand outside a door with a lawful order in your ear and people running out of time on the other side. There may be no perfect choice. There may be no safe choice. If you act without thinking, you can get people killed. If you hide behind procedure without seeing the facts in front of you, you can get people killed that way too." No one moved. Outside, children's laughter rose faintly through the glass. "This course will not teach you to be heroes. Heroes make bad policy. It will teach you to slow your fear down long enough to ask the right questions. What has changed? Who is at risk right now? What does the order assume that the scene no longer supports? What is the least dangerous option left? And if you choose to open the door, are you willing to own every consequence that follows?" His gaze moved briefly to Elena. She held it, steady and warm, and Harbor lifted his head as if the room itself had taken a breath. Callum looked back at the class. Procedure was created to protect life. Never let it become a substitute for conscience. The snow kept falling beyond the windows, bright and quiet over the repaired school, the frozen lake, the old courthouse, and the road where a sedan had once smoked in the dark. In that warm room, the kindness of one winter night did not end as gratitude, repayment, or even rescue. It became instruction. It became a coat on a wall, a dog's photograph, a lawyer's steady voice, an old officer's unfinished duty, and a generation learning that sometimes the first act of courage is not breaking a rule, but remembering why the rule existed in the first place. Sometimes the hardest choice is not between right and wrong, but between what is safe for us and what is needed by someone else. Callum's story reminds us that rules, titles, and reputation only matter when they serve life, mercy, and truth. Maybe today someone near you is standing behind a closed door of fear, loneliness, or pain. May God give us the courage to notice, the wisdom to act carefully, and the heart to open the door before the cold winds. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about a time someone showed up for you when you needed it most. And if you believe stories like this still matter, please subscribe and stay with us for the next one.